We know Doug Christie, the NBA player. We know Doug Christie, the media personality on television and on radio. We even know Doug Christie as the interim head coach amidst a sea of chaos. But what does Doug Christie look like as the head coach when it is his team? Well, to try and figure that out before we actually see it, Jason Ross, who worked with Doug for many years at SacTown Sports 1140 Radio, joins me right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here, and right now new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel.com app, download the FanDuel app or head to FanDuel.com right now to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And speaking of privileges, I've had the privilege of knowing Jason Ross and calling Jason Ross a friend, a mentor, the former host of this podcast for many, many, many years. And anytime I can have Jason Ross on the show, it's a real treat for me. J. Ross has done so much for me in my career. He's the reason why I even got my first opportunity as an intern here in Sacramento. So to be able to have him on is a lot of fun. And I knew I wanted to talk to him because I was thinking over the weekend, like, we kind of have an idea of vaguely what we expect Doug Christie to be as a coach. But like, if we were to dive into it, like, how would he handle certain situations? How do we think he'll handle situations? When we're talking about it being Doug Christie's team, what does that mean? What does that look like? What do we expect him to implement come the start of training camp? So it's like, I gotta get Jason Ross on because he knows Doug Christie really, really well. Let's see if we can try and figure that out together and piece that out together. So that's what the bulk of this conversation is about today. I really think you're going to enjoy it. Also, before we jump into that, I want to let you know that the first ever Locked On NBA Top 100 is out. All of us Locked On hosts work together to rank the top 100 players in the NBA. It is out now. I'm going to be doing kind of more of a dive into it and talking more about it later on this week on Locked On Kings. But you can go and check it out right now, the Locked On NBA Top 100, and let me know what you think about where Domantas Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan, and Zach LaVine all landed on that list. So go and check that out after you finish listening to my conversation with the one and only Jason Ross. We're trying to figure out what next season is going to look like for the Sacramento Kings on the court, off the court, in the front office, and with the coaching staff. We're very familiar with Doug Christie, the player, from his time here in Sacramento. And then we got very familiar with Doug Christie, the personality, from the media standpoint, with his time on TV and the opportunity to work with him in Sacramento sports radio. Now it's Doug Christie, the head coach, but the real head coach this time, not the interim head coach that was trying to keep his job. Jason Ross from SacTown Sports 1140 joins me. And J. Ross, you and I had the opportunity to work with Doug for years at SacTown Sports 1140. You worked with Doug every day. You hosted a show with Doug every single day. So you know that man very, very well. Also, of course, covered him with his time as a player. So that's why I'm bringing you on, for us to try and figure out what we think Doug Christie's coaching style is going to be. And the first question is pretty broad, pretty vague, pretty loaded, but how much different do we expect Doug Christie's approach to coaching to be now that he has the job secured versus when he took over a chaotic season with everybody kind of running around with the chickens with their heads cut off when he took over last year?
Yeah, I think, Matt, what'll be interesting is the shortest answer is it's probably to be determined. But if I'm trying to read it and predict it, because I think you nailed it, last year was chaos. I mean, and I think generally in my history, whether it's Doug or in any level of covering sports, the interim or the guy that replaces the previous coach, or in women's, whoever it might be, generally has been on the staff and has their own opinions of how things had been run. And so maybe it's, I like what we're doing, but here's what I think was missing. So now I'm going to slide into that mode. And I think that's what Doug, I mean, in the season is not an easy thing to do. And to be honest, I thought the Kings were going to completely fall apart.
Me too.
Not because of Doug, but because of the decision they made to get rid of Mike Brown. And they didn't, and that's credit to Doug and to the players. So they didn't get to ultimately where they wanted to, but I anticipated just a complete collapse that didn't happen. So, but I think you worded it perfectly. Now it's Doug's job. And so knowing him and what he would talk about on the radio a lot, and you got to work with him too, like you said, I know that Doug is a different thinker, and he's talked about different things in the past, like if he were ever to coach. This is maybe stuff that we might see in camp or on like retreats with the team. Like, I think he's very into a lot of different types of things, whether that could be something as simple as, or not simple, but as different as meditation or yoga, or, you know, just different things that can bond the team or bring the team together, or just different ways to get your body and mind right. So whether or not Doug incorporates that going into the season doesn't necessarily answer the question of, okay, you've lost 2 in a row and you feel like you've got a winnable game. What's the approach there? Or you got a guy that is paid a lot that maybe is not playing defense. How does he handle that? Those are the things that are probably more intriguing and interesting to the fans. But I think as a broad spectrum, I think Doug's going to have a different approach, knowing that he's got the job, his first full training camp, with kind of a mix of a lot of guys that have been here, but there are some new faces too. So I know we can probably get into more of the details of how it will go during the season, but I think it's going to be kind of a broad brush with maybe a sprinkling of some different things from Doug's history that he's going to want to incorporate.
One of the many things I loved about working with Doug on the radio side and hearing him talk about the games, he did such an amazing job using examples and analogies and from real life to illustrate something basketball related. And we got an example of that right away when he used the analogy that stuck with a lot of people of, hey, I'm trying to repair an airplane while we're in the air here. And we're not on the ground. We're in the air. We're flying, and I'm trying to fix things as we're going. So to expect Doug to make a tremendous amount of changes from Mike Brown when he's taking over midseason with Mike Brown's staff, he can make little tweaks and kind of little things here or there, but it was never really going to be Doug Christie's philosophy. And when we went and spoke with Domantas Sabonis at his basketball camp in Rockland a couple weeks ago, Domas shared with us that like Doug's already been sending the team different things about what he wants his offense to look like and different things to work on and prepare for and do individually going into camp. So Doug is already laying that foundation. I'm sure he talked about never sleeping. I'm sure he still is not sleeping, putting his head down and trying to put together what he wants this team to look like. But if you were to take some kind of identity traits of Doug Christie or things that he talked about with how he believes basketball should be played, or even things from when he was a player that you would expect, this is what I expect a Doug Christie led basketball team to be. What are those things in your mind?
Well, and that's the thing that's going to be a big question. The thing that I think Doug would want it to be, Matt, would be very much at times what we thought the Kings were incorporating last year more so was kind of a read and react, like just play with feel. There should be a natural instinct like, hey, I've played enough games with Matt George, and I know that this is where you like the basketball. I know sometimes as simple as a head nod or a look like, oh, Matt's cutting back door here, or Matt's going to pop out for three. And I can remember when Doug and Mike, or Doug and Bibby, or Doug and Bobby, or Doug and Jay Will were on the court together. There were times where Doug was kind of the facilitator, and the amount of times that he and Peja would just kind of have that look, and Peja's the guy that could pop out for three, but obviously could cut back door, and it would just be magical that like you could just see it, and it was unspoken, and they would read each other beautifully, and the defense would be fooled. And now, that was a pretty special team, pretty special level of talent, but that doesn't mean you can't find that. So I think in Doug's perfect world, it's get to know your personnel about as well as possible, and they just play on instinct, play on field. Doesn't mean you don't have plays drawn up, doesn't mean you have core concepts, but I think Doug would want a team that's run like that on offense. but also that gets after you defensively. And that, to me, right now, Matt, as we speak in early September, a month plus from the start of preseason, is one of the biggest question marks, because I think they have their best offensive players aren't great defensive players.
Yeah.
They've got defensive players that have some limitations offensively. That, to me, is the push and pull right now, because I think Doug would want to lean defense, but and I know that, like, is he going to bench Levine? Is he going to bench DeRozan at times? Is he not going to have, I don't know if Malik quite fits there, but I mean, we're talking defensively, maybe Carter and Ellis and Keegan and some other guys, and maybe even some of the young guys that might be some of their better defenders. Is he going to have the ability or the courage to play those guys more minutes? And so that, to me, you need offense too. That's what I'm watching when the season begins, is how he gets the minute distribution from his offensive to his defensive guys.
And that leads perfectly into what I wanted to ask you next, because I would hope Doug learned a lot, both good and bad, from working with Mike Brown. And I think one of the mistakes that Mike made is it felt at times where he prioritized more of how he wanted the team to play versus what the strengths of his roster were. And I understand completely Mike Brown believed that the Kings were more capable of being a better defensive team than 26th or 27th, where they were the year that they had that fantastic offense. And I'm all for Mike wanting the team to be better defensively, but it felt like he was willing to sacrifice too much of what they did great in order to be average in another area. And we saw this team was never the same as Beam Team 1. So I'm very curious of what Doug took from that and how he can go into this training camp in this next season with the philosophy of a player. He was known as a defensive guy. He was known as a guy that on the perimeter, he's gonna lock you up and he's gonna work hard. And the Kings are desperate for perimeter defense. They've been desperate for perimeter defense forever. So you'd think in theory, okay, Doug Christie's gonna be a defensive coach because he was a defensive player himself. But I think Doug is also smart enough to look around on this roster and go, I've got one of the best volume scorers in the league coming off of a crazy year last year in Zach LaVine. I've got an absolute savant in isolation in DeMar DeRozan, who still at 36, 37 years old can still get me 20 points a game. I have a center that's second only to Nikola Jokic in the things that he can do and the skill that he can do as a playmaker. So I'm very curious to see how Doug Christie tries to put those pieces together while not, of course, completely abandoning the defensive side of the floor.
Yeah, I think too, what's funny about Doug, where he made his name eventually in the league was as the defensive player that you talked about. But he'll tell you, Matt, that, he wasn't that coming out of college. Most everybody that comes out of college has their gifts offensively and maybe there's some attention defensively. But when it was with the Lakers or the Knicks, and he'll say when, I think it was Pat Riley with the Knicks, it was like, to get on the floor, you got to defend.
Yeah.
And so that's where Doug finally got on the floor. And then when he was in Toronto and came to Sacramento, he became one of the better perimeter defenders in the league and still could score too. But it was really Doug defensively that's really where his name blossomed amongst the league. And so I think of that as an example. I think of the things we just addressed. But then I also think about a team. If I take a team specific last year, I go to Indiana and I think about their evolution over the last 2 years. Let's see, 3 years ago, the Kings were, the first beam team, was one of the most prolific and highest scoring and pace and tempo and all that. Well, Indiana took it to another level 2 years ago. And then even last year was still a lot of the same core players, but they kept riding on those players with the addition of Siakam. And it was like they found a way to become a better defensive. They were so special offensively, but got enough defensively. And as the year went on, they became actually a pretty good defensive team. So they're an interesting case study because I never thought of them as a good defensive team, so good offensively, but here they make it to the finals, and come playoff time, they had enough guys that, dug in and played defense. So can you teach that? Can you get the guys that, like Levine is so gifted athletically, it doesn't make sense that he couldn't be a better defender. We always thought that with Fox, that when he really committed, it's like, man, he's a pest, but there were nights where he didn't always commit. So it's finding that balance of, hey, Sabonis, you're going to play a ton of minutes. We need you to be good defensively. Levine and DeRozan, if we're going to count on you, I got to play you and you got to play defense. So I know he's going to push that. I know Scott Perry has pushed that, but I want to see it because they've kind of been mid to lower pack defensively. And I think they got some of the defensive guys, like we said, but is Doug going to go there going, if you're not going to play defense, I'm going to put you on the bench. There's politics, there's salary, there's contracts, there's ego. That's not easy to do.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here. Hope you enjoyed that first Sunday of football. 49ers won and Raiders won. That's always a good thing. And FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So if you want to play FanDuel tonight on this first Monday night football game between the Bears and the Vikings in Chicago, you could put $5 straight up on the Vikings to win or the Bears to win. If you're right, boom, here's $300 in bonus bets for you to really have some fun on the Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays throughout the remainder of the NFL season. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team specifically or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. And it's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Accountability has been a buzzword around this organization for years, and it never really has felt like it had that much substance. At times it did. And I know there were certain people that tried to hold others accountable that maybe sometimes lost their job because of it, or certain players could only hold other players accountable in one area, but not in another because they weren't exactly holding up their end of the bargain on the other area as well. Accountability is something I'm very curious with Doug Christie too, because his philosophy was very clear when he took over mid-season, when everything was chaotic and there were maybe some divides in the locker room and some guys didn't want to be there. And his approach was, I'm going to wrap my arms around guys and I'm going to love on them. Yep. And I'm going to bring them up to the roof to see the beam. And we're going to talk about how important they are to the city. And I'm going to try and motivate them. And Doug is so gifted as a motivator and just a speaker and a people person. There's a reason why everybody loves the dude. Just because he's just so gifted in that way. And I would expect that to be part of what makes him a great coach, is his ability to wrap his arm around the players and pull, hopefully, Zach LaVine aside one day and say, man, I love you, but that's not good enough. And that's where I'm really curious how he balances that love on the players approach with the tough decisions when guys aren't necessarily doing their jobs. And we use the main guys as examples because they're so prolific offensively that there has to be some give on the defensive end. But I mean, I'm looking throughout the roster, and I'm even looking on the opposite end too, where Keegan Murray, for example, it's like you've grown tremendously as a defensive player. You've grown tremendously as a rebounder, but your offensive numbers have dipped and your shooting percentages have dropped off. And can Doug pull Keegan aside and go, look, dude, you're more than just a guy that stands in the corner on the offensive end. We need more than that. That's the part of Doug Christie that I'm very, very curious to see. And we may not really ever see it. He probably will do a lot of it behind closed doors, but can he pull that out of the players in a way that Mike was not able to, and many, many, many coaches since Rick Adelman have tried and not been able to over the 20 years now, or almost 20 years of a pretty intense playoff drought.
Yeah, my instincts tell me that he can, but that's also, I don't know if that's a bias. I'm such a huge fan personally of Doug. I want so much success for him, but that's only going to go so far. What does he have in a roster? And I almost wonder what you feel about this, Matt. Part of me feels, back to my instincts, that Doug might be best suited, based on his personality, based on what we've seen so far, either coaching one of two types of teams. I think a completely rebuilding young team that Doug can get all his fingerprints on and just like, we're going to mold and grow for the next 3 years, or a team that's kind of been championship ready or close, but I can pull every last thing. And I love the example you said earlier, like he knows better than anybody what this team means to this community, and that whole beam taking them. I think there were so many good feels about that, but they got a team that's exactly in the middle of that.
Right.
So I think the job would be tough for Popovich, for Steve Kerr, for Phil Jackson. I mean, again, it's a roster that has talent. It's kind of mismatched. They're not awful. There's good things offensively. There's some good things you can see defensively, but the puzzle right now, to me as an observer, doesn't quite fit. So getting Doug I don't know. I think this is a really big challenge, and it's not just for Doug. I think it would be for if Mike Brown was still here. I think if it's for any Kings coach in the past. So that is going to be one of his bigger challenges. I think you're right too. Even if it's, hey, he's leaning defense, but there's some defensive guys that maybe aren't playing. How does he justify that? Where it's like, we got to play defense. And I don't know, some of the guys know that they're better defenders than some of their offensive guys. And if they're not playing the right amount of minutes, putting their arms around them and explaining that. I mean, that's going to be one of the challenges I think he has, that I don't know. He may have a plan going in, but we know plans don't always lay out that way. You start 1-3 or 3-1, or things are going great, things aren't going great. Like, how do you sort that out?
Yeah, going back to when this offseason started, because remember, it began with getting demolished on your home floor on national television by the Dallas Mavericks, who were the laughingstock at the time because they hadn't won the lottery yet. And then your general manager being fired hours, if that, after that embarrassing game took place, to Scott Perry being hired essentially without a search. And it was made pretty clear that conversations with Scott had been happening for a while. And Jay Ross, there was even hesitation with Doug Christie, not because of Doug, but because of this idea that Doug was being enforced on Perry or whatever general manager would come in here. Hey, your head coach has already decided it's this guy. This is the guy we want. And even if I believe in Doug, the idea of having anybody forced on the new front office to me was an immediate red flag. And I thought it should be a red flag for whatever front office member came in. When I heard Scott Perry's press conference, his first press conference, I felt pretty good about Scott. I left that going, okay, I'm feeling better about this. Then when we heard Scott Perry and Doug Christie's press conference together, and I got to see and hear, now we need to see action, not just words, but the emphasis that both of them have on their relationship with each other and how they're going to work together. That's what I've really latched on to. And that to me is, if Doug Christie is going to have any semblance of success, he needs to have that support from his front office, and even a step further from ownership. Like, I'm putting the onus completely on them, on the higher powers above Doug, to support Doug in whatever decisions that he has to make. Easy decisions, tough decisions, does not matter. I think that has to be the difference, because we saw that there was pretty clearly over the last couple of years a disconnect between Mike Brown and the front office and what they wanted to do. Mike Brown would say we need to get better defensively, and then we'd hear from Monty McNair once every 6 months, and Monty would say offensively we need to be better, right? So just this obvious disconnect between the two. That can't happen. I feel like that cannot happen. And I believe in the strength of the relationship of Doug Christie and Scott Perry, and the ability of the two of them to really assess what they have this year. And for Scott to support Doug if he has to make the tough decision of, I'm taking away some of Zach LaVine's minutes, or I'm giving more minutes to this guy because I think he deserves it. I think Scott needs to support that. And then vice versa, Doug needs to trust in Scott going, no, Dennis Schroeder's the guy that we need, or whatever guy that he goes out and gets in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's no way organizations, pick any organization, but specifically this one, works without having harmony with your GM and your coach. And you could have disagreements. That's not what I'm talking about. But it's like you said, like, if there's a philosophy, it needs to be as close as possible. And you're spot on. Like, if we go back to that, I would not have dismissed Mike Brown. That's me. I wasn't the GM. I wouldn't have done it. And whether, there's stories come out that maybe Monty wouldn't have done it either. But that gets back to your other point, that if it's above Monty, like, you need to have harmony here, and you need to go through tough times. But then back to that, it's okay. Mike Brown's talking defense, and it seems like every player that was brought in was more offensive oriented. Well, that's not on the same page. So for the moment, it feels like they're more on the same page. The Dennis Schroeder addition, I think was done in harmony of, look, this is a guy and traditionally has picked up more full court. I think Doug's going to want to see that defensively. I think it's also a veteran point guard that, hey, you're giving a rookie head coach. We all kind of said, yeah, Carter, maybe Ellis, Monk, they all can handle the ball. Fact, I think that would have put Doug in a really tough position if that's how they entered the season. So we can debate whether Schroeder's the right pickup, but kind of what was out there, what Scott Perry felt Doug needed, what probably Doug felt he needed, I think that makes some sense. So the moves they've made, while not necessarily earth-shattering, I think they kind of make sense for both Scott Perry and for Doug Christie. Now, what's the leash that, if this is the beginning of the season, that's a brutal opening part of the schedule, and Doug's a rookie head coach. And like I said, I think they've got talented players, but the mix and match is a little bit odd to me to begin the year. And I wouldn't be shocked if they got off to a slow start. So, how comfortable is the top of management? How comfortable is Scott Perry? How comfortable is Doug Christie? So that to me are some of the early season question marks on how right now it does feel aligned, but it feels aligned today. They haven't played a game. So we'll see how rock solid that is.
Someone asked me, do you think Doug Christie can fail this season? And my immediate reaction was no. Like, I don't think that unless the wheels completely fall off, which I don't know how much worse this season could be than how last season went, to be honest. And how we saw Doug handle that turmoil, I believe he could handle more kind of rocky roads ahead if that's what the Kings are facing. I just don't see a scenario where we have the conclusion that, oh, this is Doug Christie's fault. Doug wasn't meant to have this job. King should rethink that. Like, I just don't think we should ever even consider that, or we will get to that point next season realistically. But what I love about Doug, J. Ross, and you know this too, is Doug absolutely believes that he can fail, and he will hold himself to the highest standard. I mean, he already has. He's tortured himself with the unfinished business of the early 2000s and what should have been and never was. So that's another area that I have a little bit of hope is, as much as I love Mike Brown, this was an opportunity for Mike, and he did an incredible job of finally getting this organization back to a place of relevancy. But this was a job. This was an opportunity. For Doug, he has such an emotional investment in this city and in this organization and in this team that I don't think anybody will ever be able to question if Doug Christie is willing to give his all and do everything possible in order to make this happen. So that's a part of Doug that I'm really excited about. I don't think I'm not, maybe some X's and O's things of bad rotational decisions or mistakes that he makes along the way. We'll go, ooh, Doug could have done that better, or little nitpicky things like that. I just don't see any scenario, J. Ross, where we're next season at any point, even if the Kings start the season 0-20, and we're looking at Doug going, it's the coach's problem.
I don't know that we will be, but that goes back to management. And I feel like at this moment, based on what they've done, what Vivek and the top of the organization is they still want this to be a playoff team, and they might be. So if you're a 12th seed, we may not look at it collectively like, oh, this was Doug, it's rookie jitter or whatever it is, but will management be that comfortable? So if you still have a team that wants to compete, because I think everything they've shown us in the offseason, this isn't a teardown, this isn't a rebuild. It's they're trying to reload and capture what they had maybe 2 years ago. And somehow that team, 48 wins was a 3 seed. Well, the next year, 46 was a 9 seed. So I don't know how the West will shake out. It looks great to me, but will OKC and Houston run away? And then the rest of the pack is in that 50 to 40 range. Well, I mean, that you could be 3, you could be 12. I mean, that's a really weird spot. But on the thing about Doug, everything Doug is about with this organization, and he'll probably say it at some point, he's going to want a championship mentality. Now, this isn't a championship team, but that's his approach. He is going to do everything he can to get that team there. It doesn't feel like it's there now. It doesn't really feel like it's that close, but that doesn't mean he won't try for that. That's the way he believes. And everything, a championship practice, a championship shoot around, a championship approach is how he's going to go. And you are spot on. There is Doug would love to win a championship. That's an obvious statement. But I think the biggest thrill, if that ever happened and there's confetti dropping on him, it's that they did it in Sacramento. Now, if he won a championship in Charlotte, he would love it, but it would not mean the same for him. And I don't know that he gets a job anywhere else. This is the spot that he had an opportunity. He got this job, and it is that unfinished business from the 02 and 01, 03, that group, that they so badly want a championship for the people of Sacramento. And he is so unselfish about it. Even though there would be a lot of reward and love for him, I'm telling you, he would be so emotional for Sacramento if that ever happened.
Finally, J. Ross, going back to something you said earlier about kind of being in the middle and balancing where this organization, where this roster is at. I'm very curious with how he helps the young guys. And I could even throw Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis into this, although they're kind of working their way more towards established veterans at this point, or at least getting up there in that age of being in their prime. But Neat Clifford, Maxime Reynaud, right? Like, these are two guys that I'm wondering if they could be part of the rotation right away. Neat Clifford specifically. I'm like, you have to make a case for me as to why he shouldn't be, unless something goes really, really wrong during training camp and during preseason. And then for Maxime Reynaud, it's you see the upside, you see the potential. And I know, again, the Kings are trying to win basketball games, so you don't want to put guys out there that are going to hinder that in any kind of way. I don't think Neek and Maxime would. But I'm very, very curious to see how Doug handles balancing the young players and their development and their growth, and emphasizing the future, which he and Scott Perry are still trying to put together, with the present of guys that both Doug and Perry inherited from last season's circumstances.
Yeah, I think if we take one example here, and you brought him up, is Maxime Reynaud. So I think my belief is they're going to try to thread the needle, which isn't easy to do. Sabonis obviously is your starting center. There's no debate there. He gets the bulk of the minutes. You're trying to win as many games as possible. There's a logical argument for the first sub to come off the bench and play in the front court as a guy like Eubanks. He's played in the league. To me, he's a journeyman. There's nothing wrong with him. But I think if you're trying to thread the needle, you're also trying to ramp up Maxime Reynaud, and you go, look, we're trying to win this game. It's the home opener. It's Utah. We got 14 minutes of backup center on the floor. Eubanks is probably more ready, but Reynaud is probably, could he be the future, but also could he be the present? And that's a decision they'll have to make. Neat Clifford, to your point, I personally believe, and again, small sample size, but from watching him, I think he might even be better around a Sabonis and DeRozan and Schroeder. It's like, he was pretty good in the summer, but get him around, like, he molds and melds in really well, and get him around higher level talent. I think we might see his level of play increase. So then all of a sudden, if you're playing him, how do you say that to Keon Ellis or Malik Monk or DeMar DeRozan or Levine or whoever goes on the bench, or Keegan? You know, there's challenges here that Doug's going to have, that, you know, that's what coaching is about. And pleasing everyone isn't what you have to do, but kind of keeping the roster motivated and pushing and going forward, but also win as many games with growing your future is again, that's why I said I think it's gonna be a really tough job for him.
Jaros, this is the most apprehensive I've been going into a season about a team, or like cautiously hesitant to fully understand or believe in. But also maybe the most curious I've been going into a training camp. So many elements of this team that I'm just curious about, from the fact that they have way too much talent to be dreadful to, okay, but they're three different puzzles with intermixed pieces that who knows if they ever really will fit together. And Doug has to be the poor guy to try and figure that out in his first season. So it's going to be very interesting once training camp begins to watch him start to go to work. And it would be an incredible story for Doug to hit the ground running and to be the guy that, I mean, I can picture the statue in Doco now of Coach Doug Christie, if he could actually find a way to bring Larry home here, Larry O'Brien Trophy home to Sacramento. Would be pretty cool. But J. Ross, you have been doing a phenomenal job with Carmichael Dave and Christopher Laud in the mornings on SacTown Sports 1140 with your coverage of all sports all season long. But as the build up to Kings training camp gets closer, you guys will dive into that a lot over there as well. Appreciate you taking the time, my friend. And hey, thanks for Thanks for helping me get one step closer to 2,000 episodes. You passed the torch to me early on, so I'm nearly at that milestone, and I got to take some of your work and make it mine.
I don't even know if I made 200, but it was fun to do back then. But what you've been able to do and how this has grown, the whole Locked On network, really, but for you specifically for the Kings, I mean, it's become a must listen for a lot of people out there. And you've served the base of crazies, good and bad, right? You know what you get on a daily basis, Matt. I know that. But we're both lucky to have, like, honestly, just a passionate group of crazies. I mean, there's good, there's bad, there's all in between. And we're Kings fans are a special group, that's for sure. But good on you for how far you've taken it. And 2,000, at some point we'll look at that and go, remember when you only had 2,000 episodes? You're gonna blow right past that number.
I hope so. J. Ross, thank you. And also, hey, don't forget about the Sac State Hornets football team as well. J. Ross, the voice of the Sac State Hornets, their home opener next weekend. Very excited about that.
That's right, me too. Stingers up.